So we'll be selling large amounts of oil to other countries.
In this video, we will talk about why the best Latin American air defense did not work against the American intervention force that invaded Caracas last Saturday and captured the dictator Nicolas Maduro. On the dawn of this Saturday, January 3rd, a large-scale North American attack crossed the Venezuelan airspace, entered Caracas, and in the end, captured dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife. But the most intriguing, for those who follow military affairs, was not just the audacity of the act's political and military, it was the operational silence of what, on paper, should be the most intimidating air defense in Latin America. It is important to emphasize that Venezuela is not, in theory, an unarmed target, with the country building over the years an architecture in layers, with Russian and Soviet systems of different generations, and with reinforcements of sensors of Chinese origin. In official shows and communications, we can see relatively advanced systems such as long-range S-300VM, medium and short-range systems such as Buk M2E, Pechora 2M, and Igla-S, as well as anti-aircraft artillery and mobile radars. All of this leads us to an inevitable question: how did an operation involving more than 150 aircrafts pass without activating the Venezuelan air defense? General Dan Caney, head of the United States State General Staff, described, without going into great detail, that the operation in Caracas involved what he called non-cinematic means associated with the U.S. Space Command and the U.S. Cyber Command. Units that, as the names indicate, are dedicated to the space and cyberspace spectrum of the battlefield, with the function of interfering in the opponent's ability to see, hear, and understand what is happening around them. This shows that the bombs and explosions we saw in Caracas were just an element of a much broader attack that involved mainly invisible actions, but that were crucial to the success of the mission of capturing Nicolas Maduro. But before we get into this topic, let's first take a quick look at the air defenses that Venezuela so proudly claims to have in its arsenal. Venezuela is the only country in Latin America to have an authentic air defense. That is, with short, medium, and long-range interlinked defenses. A layer-based air defense to work depends on three things. First, the eyes, represented by the radars and sensors. Second, the nerves, which are the communications and the command and control. And finally, the hands, represented by the batteries and their operators, with clear engagement rules. Venezuela, over the years, has built a relatively vast and complete arsenal, with a highlight for the S-300VM, for more demanding threats and for coverage of critical areas. In medium range, the highlight goes to the Buk M2E, quite mobile, very useful to defend sensitive points, and to cover gaps between long and short range. And in the short term, the Venezuelan arsenal is made up of systems such as Pechora 2M, 2MA modernization of the S-125, and many manpads, mainly the Soviet model Igla-S, lethal against low-flying aircraft such as helicopters. But although in the paper this arsenal seems impressive, several reports and recent analyses suggested that the Venezuelan defense was far from the peak, with several sources referring to more than 60% of the surveillance and detection capacities were out of service, stopped by lack of parts. And as if that wasn't enough, reports point to criminal infiltration and manipulation of radar routines to facilitate illicit drug trafficking. In other words, on paper, Venezuela is the country with the strongest air defenses in Latin America. But in reality, it is a big mess with holes everywhere. In the case of the American attack, the United States does not need to beat each Venezuelan battery. They just need to reduce the situational awareness of batteries in the command chain. The classic logic when the theme is to attack air defenses involves first blinding, degrading radars and sensors. Then shut up, degrading the communications and confusing, degrading the enemy's ability to distinguish the enemy's friend. And then with a blind, deaf, and confused opponent, just start cutting off the hands, neutralizing the batteries that insist on operating. And to achieve all this, the United States uses three main means, starting with the electronic war with the EA-18G Growler, which exists precisely for this: to attack, degrade, and deny the use of the electromagnetic spectrum by the enemy. And to shut down the resistant batteries, the United States uses anti-radiation missiles. Whenever a battery turns on its engagement radar, it becomes a lighthouse, and that's where AGM-88 missiles are launched, designed to search and destroy radar emitters. The practical result of this is that many operators prefer to simply turn off the radar so as not to die, thus creating blind spots in the middle of enemy territory. And finally, the United States uses means of engagement to saturate the screen with easy targets and force bad decisions. Using for this systems like MALD to increase confusion in volume of contacts, making the enemy think that he is being attacked by planes that do not exist. With all that said, the question, why didn't the Venezuelan defenses fire, rises. The most plausible scenario is a combination of 5 factors, starting with the initial American attack on critical nodes such as radars, command centers, and bases. It is a classic attack pattern in which you do not need to destroy everything, just drop the points that connect the eyes with the hands. Another element were the non-cinematic attacks referred by General Duncan, which messed up with the communications, links, synchronization, routing, support systems, and even the way the data reach the screens. And all this is important to emphasize without exploding anything. The flight profile and geometry also enter the equation, with helicopters flying at very low altitude. In flights like this, you explore the curvature of the Earth and the so-called radar horizon, when the sensor is limited to seeing only a few kilometers away. We can't ignore the human factor either, because even the most modern system can be useless if the teams are reduced, if the rules of engagement are confusing, and if there is fear of knocking down something friendly or of acting without authorization. And finally, the Venezuelan fear of connecting its large radar systems, fearing precisely anti-radiation missiles. So if the initial descriptions were correct, what we saw was the difference between an aerial defense that exists in the inventory and a real aerial defense with serious deficiencies in logistics, maintenance, and especially personnel. And finally, the Venezuelan fear of connecting its large radar systems, fearing precisely anti-radiation missiles. So if the initial descriptions were correct, what we saw was the difference between an aerial defense that exists in the inventory and a real aerial defense with serious deficiencies in logistics, maintenance, and especially personnel. In this sense, Venezuela can have the layers of defenses it wants and still be vulnerable to an opponent who knows how to attack what really matters, which is, as I referred here, situational awareness, coordination, decision time, and trust in the operator. In the end, an air defense is not just technology and equipment, it is training, maintenance, and command. And when these 3 elements fail at the same time, even the S-300 becomes an ornament.